not all in this together.
Yeah.
So if you look around some of the houses around, not back at the university where I work, those houses, a lot of them be rented. They're really low quality houses. The people living in them cannot afford solar panels. They can't afford to retrofit their houses. They can barely afford basic insulation. They can't afford an EV. Yeah, they're going to have to drive around in their old clapped out car, or possibly use the buses are improving here, but the buses and so forth. And so what you see there are families, households that are locked into their emissions. There's nothing they can do about that. They can tweak them at the margins, but they're locked into them. Yeah, you come to where I live, or you go out to Wilmslow, and you'll see people renovating bathrooms and extending their bedrooms, and doing fancy things in their garden. There's all the white vans there, all the trades and the labour out there doing things to people who already have very, very high emissions, and actually don't have to have all these new things. They don't have to fly regularly. They never have to use business class. They don't have to have a large SUV or 3 other cars in the driveway. They don't have to be living in such big houses. These are choices we're making. They're not discretionary. They're discretionary. That's the difference between the two. And I think this is particularly important because what we're seeing is this. Yeah, I'm very critical of net zero 2050. Yeah. Really critical of it. But I'm critical because I don't think it's anywhere near enough to deliver on our Paris commitments. In fact, I go further and think it isn't. It's not enough to deliver on our Paris commitments. But the reason you get the Farages and other people who are saying that net zero is wrong, because they're pretending that they care about the people who are living in the poor houses around here. And they pretend to tell them, oh, yeah, if you've got to deliver on climate change, it's going to make your life really hard. Now, that's not what they think. They don't give a damn about this is my view. They don't give a damn about the people living out there. What they care about is their incredibly high carbon and material consumption footprints of their own, of themselves, and people like them, the ones they spend their time with.
And who fund them.
And who fund them, yeah. And so if you can pretend all of this together, you can get this lot out here to vote for the idea that you don't want things on climate change. Because I would argue, I want to see the emissions of people who live in some of these houses around here go up. I'll say it very clearly on the camera. I've said this repeatedly before. I want their emissions to rise in the short term. And the reason I say that is because if the emissions go up, that means they're burning more energy in their houses. That means their houses are slightly warmer. Those houses are really damp anyway. If you can make them slightly warmer, you can drive some of the damp out. If you drive the damp out, you have less bronchial conditions for older people living in them, or indeed for some of the children that are there. That plays better in terms of the air quality, which means that the children have a better chance of having improved health, which improves their educational attainment. So it plays out really favorably for these communities. So I want their emissions to go up. I want them to use more energy. I don't want them to spend any more money doing that in the short term. In the longer term, I want those houses to be retrofitted.
But paid for by
me, by Mr. Farage, by those of us who have disproportionately benefited from the productive capacity of our society. So we have disproportionately benefited. And some people, like Mr. Farage, hugely disproportionately benefited. I don't recall when he was an ancillary nurse or helped in the hospital, or when he walked the beat as a bobby. No, these people made their money generally not by really serving society, as a lot of the people living in their houses around here will be doing. In other places who are maybe on average income or working a normal job, making a useful contribution to society. Those people are not at the forefront of dealing with climate change, maybe the impacts, but they shouldn't be dipping in their pocket to deal with it. Those of us with huge discretionary emissions who have disproportionately benefited and have huge carbon emissions ourselves, we are the ones that regulations need to force changes in our behavior, our norms. So we are not all in this together. Not only are we exempt from some of the impacts because we can buy our way out of them, we can afford the insurance, we can afford to move. These other people can't. But not only from the impacts, but also from from doing something about climate change. We fit the solar panels, but they should have solar panels in their houses paid by us. Not paid by them, paid by us. And that means we've got to start to move the productive capacity of society from those of us who disproportionately benefited to the benefit of all of society. So it's not this, I take it from the rich to the poor. It's from the rich to the public infrastructure, whether that's the houses, whether it's the buses, whether it's the trams, whether it's putting up more renewable energy power systems. All of that infrastructure is necessary. And another important part in this is that the labor and the resources that currently furnish those luxuries of people like me, where all the white vans are, where all the tradespeople are, the ones that are trained and with their apprentices and so apprenticeships. These are the ones that are going to make the changes, the physical changes to our society, to the retrofitting their houses, to putting that infrastructure in. But they can't do that when they've given us an extra bathroom, or extending our snooker room, or whatever it is they're doing in our middle class and wealthy houses. So we need to move those trades, those skills, to be doing useful things for society. At the moment, my take on this sort of simple take is that what we have is private luxury for a minority, quite a big minority, but nevertheless a minority, and public squalor for everyone else. Our infrastructures are crumbling, whether it's the health system, whether it's the school infrastructure, the buildings and so forth. Across the board, the public infrastructures, the water system, the sewage systems, we're not investing in them. And we always make this claim, it's so expensive. We get richer every year pretty much as a country. We're one of the richest countries in the world. And yet we've got increasingly public squalor in our infrastructures, and they're crumbling. Great people working in them trying to hold these things together. We need to move that huge wealth that our society has to make sure that we have, if you like, private sufficiency, good private sufficiency, and public luxury. Public services that work, swimming pools, buses, hospitals, school buildings. It's not rocket science. We have chosen to allow those things to crumble because we've chosen to privatize the wealth. And then we pretend that we haven't got the money. We evoke things like the cost of living crisis. There's no cost of living crisis. That is deliberately constructed by those of us who want to disproportionately benefit from it. I don't know any professor who's struggling through the cost of living crisis. I wonder how many Farages and friends have struggled with the cost of living crisis. So across the board, those of us that often evoke it, you listen to Radio 4, you get Amal Rajan and the others talk about cost of living crisis. They're not in a cost of living crisis. They get paid £30 million a year, plus after dinner speeches. So the people who talk about it in the media aren't part of that. So this is why I say we must drive that wedge in to recognize that there are distinct differences between different socioeconomic groups in our society. I think responding to climate change for, if you like, the average and lower average income households, by and large, would be almost like win-win, in that those houses will have to be retrofitted because we can't have the emissions coming from them. So they'll have to be retrofitted. So they'll be more comfortable to be in. You've got to have them warmer at lower energy bills. The public transport will have to be significantly improved. If there are EVs, maybe this rental system, whatever, they'll have to be put in place. All those things have to be put in place. And that means for a lot of those communities, that's really positive for them from a sort of living environment. But it also means that the air quality in the house is significantly improved, less bronchial problems as the house is warmer inside. But it also means then the transport system's improved, so the air quality is improved. So all these things play out positively. But then, of course, who's going to do that? Well, apart from the people in these houses, they're the tradespeople. There's lots of jobs for them, for their children, apprentice jobs, long-term secure jobs. So in so many respects, responding to climate change is very beneficial to those, if you like, majority households in the UK. And the reason we don't hear about that is because who is going to pay for that? And it's those of us who disproportionately benefit from the productive capacity, from the GDP of our country, if you like. And we would have to forgo a lot of the things that we have unreasonably got out of the system and still unreasonably get out of the system. So we will have to forgo that income stream coming to us to allow us to improve the public structure for everyone. But we don't want to do that. And so we pretend we're all in this together. So whether it's the Farages or some other members of some of the other parties who decry doing something about climate change, you can guarantee the ones that decry doing something about climate change are the ones who have very, very high carbon footprints. And they do not want to forgo their second or third home or their business class flights or their large SUVs or their numerous holidays or the double door refrigerators, all the things that they've totally normalized in their life. They don't want to forgo those.
No.
And they're fully aware that if you're to respond to climate change, they will have to. So the way to do that is to pretend that we're all in this together, and this is going to be a real cost on the average household. That's wrong.
So for someone listening, just so that kind of we understand whose kind of responsibility it is, and these high income households, it would be defined as like, are you worried about the cost of living crisis? If your answer is no, really, are you actually worried about it? Then it's kind of your responsibility to pay for this.
It is, but I don't expect people to do it altruistically.
No,
maybe there's a few of them out there.
Yeah.
By and large, that won't happen. If people put themselves forward to be in government and they're there to do good for society as a whole, not just for those higher income groups, then I expect them to think about these such things and put regulations in place to make sure those resources are moved more appropriately elsewhere. And so that is the role of government, to put the legislation in place to make these sorts of levels of change. Now, I think once you start to do that, there's always this play between what is culturally acceptable and what is legally required. And that's an interplay. That always has been an interplay between those two. And I think starting that dialogue, which the journalists should be doing, but of course, if you own a paper, if you're a Radio 4 presenter, the last thing you're going to want is to be talking like this, because this is deeply problematic to the high carbon, high consumption norms that these people have got.
And their listeners or their readers.
And indeed, quite often, some of their listeners and readers. And
Yeah.
even if it's not what they want to do, if you're running the Daily Mail, then what you want to do is to con all the people that read the Daily Mail, that are going to be made much worse off.
Yeah.
But actually, a lot of the Daily Mail readers would probably be better off if we dealt with these issues.
Mm.
What they're concerned about is that the senior editors and the owners of these papers will not be better off.
Yeah.
And so you have to recognise there is being a long time, there's been this, let's dilute down what's necessary for us to do about climate change, because we know damn well that means a much fairer, equitable distribution of resources across our society.
How much difference is there in the emissions or footprint of a high versus a low in the UK?
Okay. Well, it will vary very much between some certain households, but there's some work by John Barrett and colleagues in Leeds that showed that if you look at the sort of low income households and the high income households, on average, there's about 5 or 4.5-fold, I think it was, difference in the energy consumption. That broadly relates to carbon dioxide emissions. A bit more complicated, but broadly there. 4.5
energy is in like lights or stuff they're
lights,
buying.
Flying,
okay,
running their refrigerators, driving their cars.
Right.
I think it includes consumption goods, so even probably building of the houses and things. So I think it's the full energy footprint.
Yeah.
So the full energy footprint, something like about 4.5 difference between that. If you look at it from a global point of view, it's interesting that the top 1% of global emitters collectively put out twice as much emissions as the bottom half of the world's population. Just to stop, reflect what I mean. The top 1% put out twice as much emissions as the bottom half of the world's population. So emissions are massively skewed to small, but still quite sizable groups of our communities. And a lot of people sort of say, well, it's everyone in Europe. It's not true.
Or it's all the billionaires.
It's not just the billionaires. So it's not just the billionaires. It's not everyone in somewhere like Europe, like the EU, which we used to be in. But it's not everyone in Europe. So it's significant. I mean, it's probably a third of the people in Europe are in that group.
Yeah.
Really look at it in a bit more detail. Certainly, it's the billionaires, but let's not pretend it's not professors, probably senior lecturers. It probably won't be some of my earlier career academics. It's probably not them, but they're aspiring to get to professors, and that'll put them in that group. So it's always easy to point at the Musks and the Bezoses, and we should point at them, and the sooner they go to Mars, in my view, the better, as long as it's a single ticket. But it's easy to point the finger at them, but it's actually us as well. And I think we have to recognise that, and that's the bit that's quite uncomfortable. And that's why a lot of the middle class types of discussions, newspapers, programs on television, radio shows that I listen to, why this discussion is not had. It's not opened up there, because we're in that group that has done disproportionately well out of the system.